right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out today to this session. My name is Arnold Hahamyan. I'm the Master Enterprise Architect at Nissan Digital, which is basically a conglomeration of Nissan regions around the world. I represent North America. And I'm here to talk about basically what we've been doing regarding cloud, cloud native, serverless, and really our strategy and our architecture, our general architecture. You know, it's always a good thing, you know, when you come to these conferences, you hear a lot from vendors, and that's great, but it's always a good thing to understand what other peers in the industry are doing. I always crave for that sort of a thing in these conferences, and that was the kind of thing that I really wanted to hear from what other companies are doing. What's their strategy? How are they approaching things? So I've been at Nissan for 14 years, and quite a while in the industry itself. And our cloud journey is actually pretty young. We've actually been doing cloud computing principally with AWS only for the last year. So we've been pretty much in the on-prem data center sort of approach for a long time, you know, with traditional kind of computing architectures around virtual machine-based computing, you know, and applications and so on. We do dabble into, you know, SaaS at that time, we did, but it was just basically for deploying apps to SaaS, but it wasn't our clouds themselves. So it's actually pretty young. So we actually deployed our first use case into AWS last year, actually, in February. So it's pretty new. So things change in this industry. You guys all know that. And really the evolution of computing, you know, is not different than what you've seen in the music consumption case here. You know, you can kind of, I think this was a really funny slide that I actually found, you know, that kind of really puts together the picture of how things have evolved, you know, going from that, you know, ownership model to the use model, you know, with music, and the same is true with many, many, many other things that we're doing in today's world. And computing is no longer different. So in the era of cloud computing, basically, you've got a platform hierarchy. You guys know a lot of this already. So you start basically at the very bottom with the hardware, you know, your on-prem, you know, situations in your own data centers. And then you gravitate to infrastructure as a service, which you can do either on the cloud or you can do on your own private cloud if you venture to do so. Then you move into your container as a service, which is a higher level abstraction on top of that, where you're working with container management systems, orchestrators like Kubernetes and others. Then you get into PaaS, and we'll talk about PaaS in a little bit, but PaaS is where you have a little bit higher level abstraction. You know, that's where your Cloud Foundries and Herokus and OpenShifts, you know, those kinds of things come around. You know, Elastic Beanstalk and things like that. And then you venture into the FaaS, you know, and that's where people think that serverless is. You know, they think that serverless is all made up of function as a service, but it's not. You know, Lambda is not the only thing that's serverless. There's many things that are serverless. The concept of serverless just means that you don't manage the servers yourself for that particular resource. It doesn't mean it has to be a function. And then obviously you have SaaS. As you go up the food chain, you have lower development complexity and higher operational efficiency. So, and then as you go down the chain, then you have basically more flexibility, but then you also have more things that you have to manage yourself. So our strategy at Nissan, you know, in general, is to push the workloads as much as up the chain as we can that's technically feasible and through the business criteria. So when I say technically feasible is that, you know, it's different when you have an organization that's been only around for a couple of years or 5 years and has got only a few applications. You know, it's easy to move those around. But when you've got a company that's been doing things for the last decades, over, you know, century, you've got literally thousands of applications that have been created over all those times across all the different computing paradigms that you can think of that are still functioning. So you can't just basically make a switch. So you have to be able to have some sort of a strategy in moving those into the cloud world and so on and so forth. So that's where, you have to think about what your strategy is going to be. You cannot move something that's running in your on-prem data center overnight into cloud and expect it to be all serverless. You have to kind of go through the motions. And that means maybe sometimes lift and shift and then refactor or rewrite because you have to do it because of functional reasons in the app. So you've got this thing here that talks about basically, what do you want to manage? What do you care to manage? What's your focus? Where's the value? So as you basically go to the right, you are doing less things yourself, and you're letting the cloud environment do more things for you. So when you're in the infrastructure as a service, you're having to do a lot of things yourself. Virtualization hardware is taken care of for you, but anything above that is your responsibility. Patching in the operating system, updates, containerization, runtime, the middleware, the data store, application code. These are all things that you have to take care of. And you have to have people to do that. And you have to have money to do that. And it takes time to do that. Also, as you move into the right, you are letting go of those things. You are letting the cloud provider take care of those things because you're feeling that that's not your business to do, or you're just not very good at it. And that little thing in the middle that looks like a bug, it's not a bug, actually. It's a blur. And that's because things are blurred when you kind of start talking PaaSes and CaaSes. What's a PaaS, what's a CaaS? Sometimes vendors will say, hey, we're a platform, but even though it's more of a CaaS, and sometimes it's a CaaS, kind of gets talked about like it's a PaaS. So there is some blurring of the words there. And then when you move into the function as a service, you're really kind of just managing the code yourself. And then everything else is pretty much taken care of for you. Now, for the data store layer, you're using things like Dynamo and things like that. So you're kind of relinquishing, those kinds of things to the platform vendor. But at the end of the day, you're not having to manage those things, which we feel is a good thing. Because we're not in the business of actually standing up platforms. We're in the business of creating solutions to sell more cars, to get more people a better experience. And things are complex. Things have not gotten easier ever since computing has begun. Over the years, the decades, computing has become more tough. Things, were so monolithic back then, a long time ago, and those were easy. And as we have gotten more mature, we've found out that things are more disconnected, so you have to kind of stitch them together. And there are new challenges, new technology areas that are coming around, right? So machine learning, blockchain, big data, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. These are not things that I have to tell you that you already know these type of things. These things are not things that you can easily do it yourself. It takes a lot of time to try to even do it yourself, let alone being able to do it well. You really want to harness machine learning and AI, but you don't want to have to build a platform to do that for you. You want to be able to plug in, get your data trained, create your models, hook it up to some sort of service and serve. So as things get more and more difficult, you want to rely on the cloud providers and serverless architectures to do that for you. That's the essence of things. So what our guiding principles are at Nissan is, first of all, we want to have speedy time to market. We're a car company, but we also understand that we're also a technology company. Every company is a technology company today because you have to be. You cannot just say, I just make widgets and that's all I have to worry about. Technology is just a necessary evil. It's not. It's actually part of the winning combination for you. You have to harness it to the best that you can. That means that you have to have solutions that you bring speedily to the market. And the thing is, it's those things that actually add value. So we want to make sure that we want to be cloud first. That is one of our key points. We want to be cloud native because we want to take complexity out of the equation. We obviously want high performance. Everybody wants that. And we want high availability. Our own data centers don't have the redundancy that we need in the case of disaster. And we get that out of the box with multiple AZs, with things like AWS and Google and Microsoft and, those kinds of clouds, right? So, and then we want minimal operational complexity. Having loads of people in ops is not necessarily a great thing to have. It's, yeah, you have a lot of people, but the thing is that means that you have a lot of complexity that you have to kind of, cater to, right? And then we want zero upfront investment and pay as you go. We don't want to get into those multi-year contracts that we have to sign with people for certain X amount of consumption that we are licensed for or subscribed to, that we have to pay large sums of money up front. Maybe some of it is consumed, maybe some of it is not. When something is given freely by the enterprise, people either look at it and say, oh yeah, I'll use it, maybe I won't use it, but nevertheless we paid for it. So basically, you pay it up front, you don't pay nothing up front and you pay as you go, and you shift that towards the cost centers that are consuming those resources. They know exactly what they're paying for. And if they don't like what they're paying for, then they'll do something less, and they won't pay for it anymore. So shifting the burden onto the actual consumer of the service is what actually makes it much more efficient to consume the service, rather than these large enterprise agreements and so on and so forth that you buy quantities for. Because with cloud providers, you can just consume what you want, what you don't want. Utilizing proven cloud architecture patterns. We are big on patterns and reference architectures because we think that without utilizing things like that, we're going to basically falter. We're going to try to figure it out ourselves. There's no point in it. We want integrated billing with cloud providers. This is very important. As I just mentioned, we want the bills to go directly to that cost center, that area that's paying for it. They find out what they're paying for and they adjust accordingly. And they maximize what they're getting also. So we want standardized logging management for the native services. Everything is integrated in the cloud native environments. They play well together. So we're able to harness all of that instrumentation, monitoring, and so on and so forth. One thing is that when you start dealing with technologies that are outside of the cloud native ecosystem, they may be very good technologies, but they're always playing catch-up to the cloud providers. They have the services, capabilities of what they have today, but as soon as the cloud provider moves 2 steps forward, they're having to catch up. So sometimes if you use those technologies, then you have to basically go and be at a common denominator, and you cannot really maximize the cloud environment to the utmost. Of course, with the cloud native solutions that you don't do yourself, you actually get support, the basic support out of the box. They're committed to making sure that that SLA is there, that the service is up, and all of that. And of course, the cloud providers have built-in security measures, the IAM from AWS and similar in the other cloud providers. They're making sure that things are secure because it's in their interest to make sure that things are secure. But that doesn't mean that you can just rely on them to take care of everything for you. If somebody somebody installs a lock on your door and says, here's the key, and you leave the door open, well, that's your problem. That's not the locksmith's problem, right? So we want to make sure that we utilize cloud-native managed solutions by default. So when I mean managed, is that sometimes cloud-native, it's one thing, but it can be that it's a lot of things that are happening that open source-based solutions are actually being deployed or being made available as managed solutions. You can look at, like, for example, Amazon's managed Kafka. It's Kafka that is open source, but it's made into a managed service. So that we consider that to be almost equivalent to cloud native in that particular case because it's something we don't have to worry about spinning up. So if we want to use Kafka, we can use that. We don't actually spin up Kafka on our own with zookeepers and things like that on our own. We use the managed service that they have. If we want to use that, we can use Kinesis as well, and so on. So again, refrain from doing it yourself. Don't try to cook up EC2 images. We have 0 EC2 images in our new architectures. Nothing. We don't want to cook up EC2 images, install software, having to patch them, having to update them, having to be in that business. We want to seek SaaS solutions, really, ultimately, when we're talking about packaged solutions. We want to make sure that solutions that we use, are available on the cloud. If the vendor has got a particular offering, we don't want to install it in-house. We want to use it on their cloud-hosted environment as the first choice. And we want to automate. We want to make sure that we automate the heck out of everything. Now, this is all a work in progress, mind you. We've been only at this 1 year, but I think that we've got a pretty decent idea about where we want to go. And so we want to make sure that we invested in global DevOps environment with a number of tools, and those tools are not necessarily all AWS tools. They're things that you well know, like things like Jenkins and things like that. But we do have a lot of AWS technologies that we're utilizing there. So we want to make sure that we automate, as much as we can, both in terms of integration, both in terms of, testing and deployment as well. So what we've done is that we've created 3 landing zones around the world. So we are centered around global regions. So we wanted to make sure that we had global consistency. We don't want to have every region of Nissan doing things differently. So we wanted to make sure that we have that bedrock, the foundation laid in where all of the regions have the same exact technology available to them. Our home is AWS in terms of cloud computing. That's home base for us. And I'll talk about multi-cloud in a second or two. But we have basically 3 regions, 3 landing zones that have been created. For those that don't know what landing zones are, you can take a look at it, but it's basically a sort of a home base, if you will, in the AWS cloud. And we've got 3 of those around the world. And what we've done is that we created a internal Stackshare model. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Stackshare.io. I think it's very interesting. You might want to take a look at it. But it's basically a place where you can see what are the stacks that different companies are using. So you can take a look at like Uber. What is their stack? What are they using? You can take a look at Airbnb. What is their stack? Right? It kind of gives you an idea. I think it's pretty cool. But the thing is, it lets you see what those things are and kind of actually delve into them. Well, given that we are young in the computing world and we've come from more of a legacy kind of mindset, we need to actually educate people on the things to use, how to use them properly, and so on and so forth. Because a lot of people are bringing old baggage along. But the thing is, we don't want to have those baggages going forward. So we need to have a kind of a re-education, or at least kind of streamlining towards people, towards right things to do, the patterns and the reference architectures. So what this allows us to do is actually give them a Stackshare model where they can go in, they can find the technologies that they're looking for. If they have a requirement for something, they can put mobile, and all the mobile items come up, and they can find more documentation and reference architecture information and so on. And this is because, again, we're young. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road, a lot of this will be old hat, and they'll be already knowing things. But then again, things will change again, so we'll add more documentation, right? And what we've done is that we've created architectural patterns and reference architectures that are, again, centered around these principles that we talked about, cloud native being at the very center of things. So if you actually look at these 2 diagrams here, I mean, this is like a basic kind of application if you think about it, but it's an intranet-facing web application over on the left and a mobile application on the right. And you can see that these are all using cloud native components from AWS. There's a particular method to each thing, So this is like a blueprint. So they can take this, and this is just one example. That we're creating other ones around machine learning and event-driven architectures and so on and so forth, so that they can just take this and they can basically put it into their application. And we're going to have actually the CloudFormation IAC scripts that kind of go along with these as a next step. We're still in the early phases of that. But this gives them an idea of what to use instead of trying to figure out what to use, and focuses them on building the solution and not necessarily the plumbing underneath it. And then there's the concept of multi-cloud. Well, they say, well, what about multi-cloud? What are you doing with that? Well, we believe in multi-cloud. First of all, we believe in not running our own data centers in the long term. We are doing that now. I mean, again, we've been only at this for a year, right? So we want to move away from this private on-prem data center. People talk about hybrid cloud. Yeah, that's fine. But the thing is, if you really feel that you're doing a great job on the private cloud, that's great. But we've never really done a great job on the private cloud. It's been really just a data center with no additional redundancy. So a lot of sunk cost, but really not a whole lot of modern tooling. So what we're doing is that we're moving that into AWS. And so that's happening. But in terms of multi-cloud, every cloud has got its good things. Now, for us, AWS is home base. That's where we put our strategic workloads, right? But there are some things about Azure and Google that actually make sense. So if, for example, if you're a Microsoft-heavy shop, Azure is not a bad idea after all, right? Also, if you are looking for Office 365 as a way to go forward in your Office suite, well, you're going to use Azure. If you have Active Directory in your organization for your directory services and Exchange and those kinds of things, and you're moving away from the on-prem data centers, well, you're going to be in Azure because it supports those facilities, right? But it doesn't mean that you just basically put everything there. You take the good parts that they have, and then you use them strategically. And then same thing also applies to Google Cloud too, and there are good cases for that, when the situation comes up. So it's when and where it makes sense. Not necessarily that we're just going to dole out things, okay, 25% go here, 25% go there, 25% go there. No, we're not going to do that. That just doesn't make any sense. So that's pretty much what I have. Any questions?